The room was cold, not just in temperature, but in the chill of betrayal that hung in the air. I, Evelyn, sat numbly at the oak table, my hands trembling slightly as the lawyer, Mr. Thompson, read aloud the will of my late father. Martin, my husband of over 30 years, stood beside me, his eyes greedily scanning the document. Linda, my brother David's wife, sat across from us, her face poorly concealing a smirk. The entire estate, valued at approximately $100 million, will be inherited by David, the eldest son, Mr. Thompson announced in a matter-of-fact tone. My heart sank. But how can this be? I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. My gaze fell upon the will, the words blurring as tears welled in my eyes. I had endured Martin's cold indifference and harsh words for years, clinging to the hope that my father's inheritance would be my ticket to freedom. Martin scoffed. Well, this settles it, Evelyn. Your dramatic fantasies of independence are over. Linda chimed in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. It's such a shame, Evelyn, but we must respect your father's wishes. Their words cut through me. My father, who I had cared for tirelessly, couldn't have left me with nothing. It didn't make sense. I need to see that will, I demanded, my voice stronger than I felt. As Mr. Thompson handed me the document, I scanned it desperately. My father's signature was at the bottom, seemingly authentic. A wave of despair washed over me. Had my own father really forsaken me like this? You can bring in a handwriting expert if you don't believe it, Martin said, his voice laced with condescension. But it won't change the facts. I looked up, meeting his cold gaze. I will, I said firmly. There has to be a mistake. As I left the room, the weight of my shattered hopes bore down on me. I had dedicated my life to caring for my father and enduring Martin's emotional abuse. Now it seemed I was left with nothing but a broken heart and a life I desperately wanted to escape. That night, alone in the darkness of my room, I made a silent vow. I would not let this injustice stand. I would uncover the truth, no matter what it took. The fight for my rightful inheritance had just begun. The following days were a blur of determined action amidst a storm of emotions. Evelyn, contacted a renowned handwriting expert, Mr. Clarkson, clinging to the hope that my father's will was a forgery. My heart raced as I sat in Mr. Clarkson's office, the will laid out before him. He examined it meticulously, his brow furrowed in concentration. Moments stretched into eternity as I awaited his verdict. Finally, he looked up, his expression solemn. I'm sorry, Mrs. Evelyn, he said gently. The handwriting matches your father's. The will is authentic. The room spun around me as his words sank in. Authentic? How could it be? Despair gripped me, threatening to pull me under. But then a spark of anger ignited within me. This wasn't just about money. It was about my father's legacy, about justice. I thanked Mr. Clarkson and left, my mind racing. If the will was indeed my father's doing, why would he disinherit me? And why did Martin and Linda seem so unsurprisingly content with the outcome? Determined to find answers, I called David. He had been strangely silent since the will's reading. David, it's Evelyn. We need to talk about Dad's will, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause before David replied. I've been meaning to call you, Evelyn. I'm just as shocked as you are. Let's meet tomorrow. The next day, at a quiet cafe, David's face was a mask of confusion and concern. He listened intently as I shared my doubts and the expert's confirmation. I can't believe Dad would do this. David murmured, shaking his head. It doesn't add up. Something feels off, I insisted. Martin and Linda, their reactions were too calculated. David's eyes narrowed. You think they're involved? I don't know, but I intend to find out, I declared. David, we need to dig deeper. There's more to this than meets the eye. David nodded, a resolute expression forming on his face. I'll support you, Evelyn. Let's uncover the truth together. That evening, I lay in bed, my thoughts a whirlwind. The truth was out there, hidden beneath layers of deceit. Martin and Linda would not get away with this. I would fight for what was rightfully mine, for my dignity, for justice. This was no longer just about inheritance. It was a battle for my very soul, and I was ready to wage war. The next few days were a whirlwind of clandestine meetings and whispered phone calls. David had hired a private investigator, Mr. Green, to delve into Linda's recent activities. We were both desperate for any shred of evidence that could shed light on the situation. In my kitchen, under the harsh fluorescent light, David and I huddled over Mr. Green's preliminary report. My heart pounded as David read aloud. According to this, Linda has been making frequent secretive visits to a downtown law office, David said, his brow furrowed. A law office? I echoed, a sense of foreboding washing over me. And there's more, David continued, his voice hardening. She's been seen with Martin on several occasions outside of family gatherings. I felt a chill run down my spine. Martin and Linda? What were they up to? The pieces of the puzzle were slowly falling into place, but the emerging picture was one I dreaded. We need to confront them, I said, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and resolve. David placed a hand on my shoulder, his gaze firm. We will, Evelyn, but we need more evidence first. We can't tip our hand too soon. He was right, of course. We had to be strategic, but the waiting, the not knowing was excruciating. In the meantime, David advised me to claim my statutory share of the inheritance. Even if Dad's will is legitimate, you're still entitled to a portion of the estate, he explained. I hesitated. The idea of accepting even a fraction of what I felt was rightfully mine left a bitter taste in my mouth. But David was insistent. It's your right, Evelyn, and it might give us more leverage in finding out what's really going on. So, with a heavy heart, I agreed. I would claim the family home and land, valued at $10 million. It was a far cry from the $50 million I had hoped for, but it was something. A few days later, we confronted Martin and Linda. Their reactions were as cold and calculated as ever. The decision has been made, Evelyn. Don't stir up trouble now, Martin said, his voice dripping with disdain. Linda echoed his sentiment, her eyes glinting with malice. Really, Evelyn, you should be grateful for what you're getting. I clenched my fists, struggling to maintain my composure. Their smug arrogance was infuriating, but I knew I had to play the long game. Don't worry, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. I'll get what's rightfully mine. As I left the room, their laughter echoed behind me, mocking and cruel, but it only fueled my determination. I would have my revenge, and they would pay for their treachery. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight. The days following our confrontation were tense. I could feel Martin's and Linda's mocking glares at every turn, but I refused to be cowed. David and I were patient, biding our time as Mr. Green continued his investigation. Then, one rainy afternoon, David called me with a voice trembling with suppressed excitement. Evelyn, you need to come over. We've found something. I rushed to his house, heart pounding with anticipation. David greeted me with a folder in his hands, his eyes burning with a mix of anger and triumph. Look at this, he said, spreading out a series of documents on the dining table. Dad made another will, years ago. It was never revoked. My hands shook as I read the older will. It was a stark contrast to the recent one. This document left 3/4 of the estate to me and 1/4 to David. There it was, in my father's unmistakable handwriting, a beacon of hope amidst the darkness. But why? I whispered, tears of relief and confusion mingling. David's jaw clenched. I think Dad knew something might happen. He was protecting us. The room felt suddenly colder as the implications sank in. Our father had foreseen the possibility of deceit and betrayal. We need to expose Martin and Linda, I said, a newfound resolve stealing my voice. David nodded, a determined glint in his eye. We will, and we have the perfect opportunity. The following week, we called for a family meeting under the pretense of discussing the estate. Martin and Linda arrived, smug smiles plastered on their faces, unaware of the storm that was about to hit them. As they settled in, David began, his voice calm but commanding. Before we proceed, there's something you both should see. He laid out the older will for them to see. The color drained from Linda's face, while Martin's eyes widened in shock. This can't be real, Linda stammered. It's as real as it gets, David said coldly. Notarized and everything. Martin's face contorted with rage. You're trying to swindle us out of our rightful inheritance. I stood up, facing them both. No, Martin, you're the one who's been trying to swindle me. You and Linda. But it's over now. Linda's composure crumbled, her voice rising in panic. But the stocks, the money, it's supposed to be ours. David leaned in, his voice icy. You were so busy plotting, you didn't see the bigger picture. The majority of the estate's value is worthless now. The real value lies in the real estate, which, according to the legal will, goes mostly to Evelyn. The realization hit them like a physical blow. Martin's face turned a shade of purple, while Linda seemed to shrink in her seat. "This isn't the end," Martin hissed. "We'll fight this." "Go ahead," I said, my voice steady. "But remember, we have evidence of your deceit, and we're not afraid to use it." As they left, their defeat was palpable. The tables had turned, and justice, though delayed, was finally within my grasp. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The revelation of the older will sent shockwaves through our small family circle. Martin and Linda, once arrogant and unassailable, now seemed like cornered animals, desperate and dangerous. In the days that followed, David and I prepared for the inevitable legal battle. We armed ourselves with the best lawyers, ready to defend the truth of the older will. But as we strategized, an unexpected twist unfolded. David received a call from Mr. Green, our private investigator. His voice was grave. "I've uncovered something you both need to see." We met in David's study, the rain pattering against the window pane setting a somber mood. Mr. Green laid out a series of photographs and documents on the desk. They depicted Martin and Linda in various clandestine meetings, their body language intimate, betraying an affair. I felt a nauseating mix of disgust and vindication. "So it was them all along," I muttered. David's face hardened. "They've been playing us for fools, but they won't get away with it." The final blow came when Mr. Green revealed the extent of the estate's devaluation. The stocks, once the backbone of the inheritance, were practically worthless. The real estate, my portion according to the older will, was the only asset of significant value. Armed with this knowledge, we confronted Martin and Linda at the lawyer's office. Their faces, once smug, were now masks of anxiety and fear. "Seems like your little plan backfired," David said coldly. Martin's face turned a deep shade of red. "This is nonsense. Those stocks are worth millions." "Not anymore," I interjected, relishing the moment. "Your greed has led you to a dead end. And let's not forget the affair." Linda's face crumbled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It's not what it looks like. We were just what?" I snapped. "Conspiring? Betraying? You're both despicable." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Given these revelations, we need to revisit the terms of the inheritance." Martin was seething. "You can't do this. We'll take this to court." "Go ahead," David said calmly. "But remember, we have all the evidence we need to expose your lies and your affair. Think carefully about your next move." Defeated and humiliated, Martin and Linda had no choice but to accept the terms of the older will. They left the office, their dreams of wealth shattered. As I watched them go, a sense of deep satisfaction filled me. They had tried to destroy me, but in the end, karma had struck with a vengeance. My fight was over, and justice, though long delayed, was finally mine. The days following our victory were filled with a mix of relief and surreal disbelief. I had triumphed against those who sought to crush me underfoot. As I stood in the now legally mine family home, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't known in years. David and I, along with our lawyers, finalized the legal proceedings. Martin and Linda were left with little more than their shame and regret. The news of their affair and deceit spread, tarnishing their reputations irreparably. One afternoon, as I was arranging some of my father's belongings, David came to visit. He looked lighter, almost carefree, a stark contrast to the burdened man he had been during our ordeal. "Evelyn, I've been thinking," he began, a soft smile on his face. "This house, it's always been a place of family, of togetherness. It's only right that it continues to be so." I nodded, understanding his sentiment. "It's a big house, full of memories. It should be filled with life, with joy." "That's why I've decided to move back here with you," David said warmly. "After everything, I think it's what Dad would have wanted." The idea of living with David, of rebuilding our family bond in the home we grew up in, filled me with happiness. "I'd like that very much," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. In the following weeks, we transformed the house. We repaired what had been neglected, revitalized the gardens, and filled the rooms with laughter and warmth. The house, once a symbol of my imprisonment, was now a beacon of hope and renewal. As for Martin, his affair with Linda led to his downfall. His once prominent career crumbled as colleagues and friends distanced themselves. Linda, too, found herself isolated, her manipulative nature exposed for all to see. I, on the other hand, embraced my newfound freedom. I started hosting community events, inviting neighbors and friends to share in the joy of my home. The house became a hub of activity, a place where people came together, just as David and I had envisioned. In time, I also began a small business, using my skills and experiences to empower other women who had faced similar struggles. My story, once a tale of sorrow and oppression, became one of resilience and strength. As I sat in the garden one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, I reflected on my journey. The pain, the betrayal, the fight for justice, it had all led me to this moment of peace. I had lost much, but in the end I had gained something far more valuable: my freedom, my dignity, and a chance to start anew. The darkness of my past was behind me, and ahead lay a future bright with possibility.